The microphone issue that you brought to our attention, I know that that has now been resolved, and I think we can be assured that it will not happen again. There was a right. So I think all of you gotten an explanation from the camera operators and other media personnel. So hopefully that's all resolved. Are there any other issues that we need to take up? Is Mr. Oh, okay, he is Mr. Brown. I couldn't see your co-counsel there for a second.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was trying to.
He's still here.
Okay. Put the computer on, so my computer will not run out of batteries. I'm sorry,
I just had a scheduling type question. So my sort of halfway informed forecast of the evidence is that we're going to finish the evidence this week. And so, and we're certainly ready for anything that we would need to do at the guilt innocence phase, but in terms of our mitigation witnesses, we have a number of people that we have to make travel arrangements for. And so I basically, if we need to have people here before next Monday, someone needs to tell us that, because otherwise we would, because we don't want to have to keep them here over the weekend, and it would be at the tail end of the week if they did get called. So that's sort of where our heads are, and if that is wrong, someone needs to tell us.
All right. I think the state probably has an idea of the witnesses that you still have yet to call, and probably have a pretty good estimate of.
Thursday morning, I can see us finishing up all of our witnesses by then.
I would say if evidence wraps up Thursday morning, then it would be safe to say that Monday for any second phase would be fine. Even if we were to get to deliberations on Thursday, I wouldn't have a problem with just simply going to any second phase as needed starting Monday.
I just wanted to make sure.
Right. If it's going to be dramatically shorter than that, let us know when you know. If you're talking about, say, wrapping up tomorrow, then we'd probably want to know.
I think we'd probably get into what is tomorrow, Tuesday? We'll get into Wednesday for sure.
Right. And I think even with that, then we still have a good charge conference and closings and deliberation. So if the jury started deliberating Thursday, I'd be fine with simply going to Monday.
Thank you.
All right. Anything else? No, okay, very good. Let's bring Jerson. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Further questions, Ms. Shikita?
Yes, Your Honor, thank you. Detective Brady, I think when we finished, we were talking about what was going on in Wake Forest on May 21st of 2013 after the seller failed to show the day before. And you said that there had been some surveillance done at Michael McCullum's residence. Again, I think you had said, and I want to be clear, had you all made arrangements prior to going to his home to also get a search warrant to search his home?
We did.
Okay. In addition to the laptop that just was put into evidence, the silver laptop, did you seize any other items at the residence?
I think we took some shoes. I think there was a crowbar, some cell phones, and some marijuana.
And the cell phones that you took, why did you decide to take some cell phones?
We were just trying to find the cell phone. At that point, still, we had no knowledge if Mr. McCullum was part of the homicide. So we were taking his phones just for investigative means later, and also to find the phone that possibly he used as the cell phone number that called Detective Morse, or that Detective Morse called to buy the computer.
And at that point, or at some point prior to May 21st, had you been aware that Melissa's iPhone was missing?
Yes.
And up until the time you're searching the residence at Mr. McCullum's home, had you found the iPhone?
No, ma'am.
While you all were searching while you were searching the residence of Mr. McCullum, were there other officers in the area doing other activities?
There was.
And what was going on in addition to what you were doing at the residence?
There was some surveillance done, I think, on Mr. McCullum's, don't remember if it was fiance, wife, girlfriend. His vehicle was seen leaving, so I think they were following that. And then they eventually got down to the Walmart area in Wake Forest.
And we've heard a lot about that Walmart area. May I approach the witness, Judge?
Yes.
I'm going to show you what I'll mark as State's Exhibit 73. State's Exhibit 73, and ask if you recognize State's Exhibit 73.
Yes, ma'am.
And what is State's Exhibit 73 a photograph
It
of?
appears to be the Walmart in Wake Forest.
Okay. And have you had occasion either on that day or subsequent to that day to go to that general area in terms of this investigation?
Both.
We've talked about a sort of a side of the Walmart that there's an Andy's, which I think is Highway 55 or something now. Does this photograph also show that area?
I believe so, yes, ma'am.
And would it help to illustrate sort of the layout of the Walmart parking lot in addition to the Andy's area?
Yes, ma'am.
Here at this time, the state would move to introduce State's Exhibit 73 for illustrative purposes.
Any objection? It's allowed for illustrative purposes.
Detective Brady, you had said that there were officers doing surveillance following the car. At some point, were you made aware that they had identified two people that were at least involved with the car itself at the Walmart?
I was told that they had two people that they stopped and that they were going to be taking to Atlantic Avenue for interview.
And again, similar to what you had described earlier, is that uncommon? That is that you're at one scene and other people are doing things.
Yeah, it's very common.
At this point, we're at May 21st, so 7 days. Yeah, 7 days, a week after the homicide. How would you describe the efforts of the Raleigh Police Department to investigate this case in that preceding week?
We were doing everything we could, following every lead possible, every phone call, every possible. We didn't have a whole lot at that time, so we were digging, looking for anything we could.
And earlier, I think Detective Gibney started talking about a checkpoint. Were you made aware if that was one of the efforts?
Yes, ma'am.
How would you describe in terms of you all getting sleep during that week?
Didn't have a whole lot.
Okay. At the point where the two men identified now, obviously, as Ronald Anthony and Travion Smith were taken to the police department, did you stay out in Wake Forest?
I did.
Okay. And after some time, did you develop an additional location that you wanted to go search as well?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And where was that location?
Information, when the officers had gotten the two subjects that took to Atlantic Avenue for interview, they identified a couple of females that were also at the Walmart. One was Amber Alberts and the other was Michelle Perry. They were there at the Walmart. Officers had her as well. Detective Morris and I went down to the parking lot and actually spoke with them. Amber was the possessor of a phone that had the pictures that was used to send to Michael McCollum for the sale of the computer. And we even had CCBI come out for that as well. And during that time is when Detective Morris took her phone, took it back to the detective division, as we say, dump the phone, which means extract the information from the phone. He took it back, and then that is when they decided to get a search warrant to go to Amber's house, which was in Oxford.
And did you accompany them, or who, do you recall who went out there?
I believe it was Detective Morris, Detective Gill, and Sergeant Cashwell, but I did not go.
And previously, Detective Gill and retired Detective Gill and Detective Morse talked about going out there. Did you make efforts at some point to try to locate, again, Melissa's iPhone?
We did.
And when was that?
I believe that was on the 22nd, I believe.
And specifically, where did you go?
Yes, it was on the 22nd. We were given information that her phone possibly was thrown in a wooded area by the Walmart in Wake Forest.
Here, may I publish State's Exhibit 73?
Yes.
Your Honor, may Detective Brady stand?
Yes.
Can you show the jury on State's Exhibit 73 where the Walmart itself is?
This is Walmart right here.
And then the area where Andy's or now Highway 55
I
is?
believe it's in this part of the shopping center.
Where was it, or can you use State's Exhibit 73 to show us where you went to look for the phone?
Yes, we were told that it was somewhere to the right, looking at Walmart, to the right of Walmart. So we went down in here, right on this little side road. There's an area here that appears to have been cleared. At one point, it's very wooded, but there's an area that it's, at one point, maybe some of the trees were taken, and there's a path right there. So Detective Gill walked down to the bottom of the path. I started at the top of the hill. It's hard to see here the terrain, but it's kind of a steep drop. He went down to the bottom of the hill. I started at the top, and pretty much immediately when Detective Gill got to the bottom of the hill, the phone was sitting right there.
And may I approach the witness, Judge?
Yes.
Detective Gill, he's identified State's Exhibit 12 containing 12A. Do you recognize this?
Yes, ma'am.
And what is State's Exhibit 12A?
That was the phone we recovered from that location.
And once you recovered it, what did you do with it?
We were able to verify that it was Melissa's.
And did you take it into evidence?
I did.
Did you ask at some point that it be processed further?
Yes.
And if you can, and you may not be able to, with State's Exhibit 73, generally speaking, how far would you say from that area that's depicted in 73 was Mr. McCollum's residence?
A couple miles.
We had talked about the fact that Mr. Smith and Ronald Anthony were at the police department being interviewed. At some point, were you made aware that Sarah Redden had also been asked to come to the police department?
Yes, ma'am.
And again, at the end of Sarah's interview, this defendant's interview, and Ronald Anthony's interview, did you speak with the detectives who had individually interviewed those folks?
I did.
And did they share with you all of the information that they had gotten?
They did.
You described that this crime scenes that is back at Allister, the upstairs and downstairs apartments, had been kept for a while. Do you recall about when it was that you decided to release those crime scenes?
It was after all of this, we released the crime scene. It would have been probably a week and a half later.
After at some point on the 21st into the 22nd, did you make some arrests?
We did.
Once you arrest individuals in connection with a murder case, does your investigation stop?
No, ma'am.
And specifically in this case, did you receive a phone call from an attorney, or did you receive phone calls from either the DA's office or attorneys indicating there may be information that people wanted to share?
Yes, ma'am.
And when, for example, someone from our office or individual attorneys would contact you, would you make arrangements to interview the folks that may or may not have information?
Yes, ma'am.
Specifically, I want to draw your attention to DeAndre Maurice Brown. Did you interview that fellow?
Yes, ma'am.
And do you know how it was that that person at least came to the police department's attention?
Contact was made by Attorney Burton Unley, who he said represented Mr. Brown. Said Mr. Brown had some information he wished to share.
And do you recall about when it was that you got that information? That is, that someone reached out to you?
It was 5/24, I have noted.
And did you make arrangements to meet with Mr. Brown yourself?
I did.
And when was that?
That was on the 29th, 5/29.
Did you in fact meet with him?
I did.
And were you able to confirm that he did in fact drive the car?
I did.
Objection. Yeah, with the wheel.
Sustained as to the form of the question.
After speaking with the individuals on May 21st into 22nd, did you follow up with some folks that worked in the North Hill shopping area?
I did.
And specifically, who did you speak with?
I spoke with, I first went to Bonefish Grill because there was information about Mr. Smith, Mr. Anthony, Ms. Redden going to the Bonefish afterwards. I went there to see if they had any video cameras that could have captured them. In talking with them, I was able to identify a possible worker that had contact with them, and I interviewed her.
And was that Miss Melvin?
It was.
That testified?
Yes.
In terms of, were you able to hear the testimony of Amy Radley?
I did.
Did you also speak with her?
Yes, I went to Ben & Jerry's. I was actually going through the whole neighborhood, going to a lot of different places, and went to the Ben & Jerry's, and eventually spoke with Miss Radley about it, and she advised me that she was working the day in Ben & Jerry's when the three came into the store. There was a disagreement or some sort of conversation about filling out the...
All right. I'll provide a limiting instruction. Go ahead and finish your answer.
There was conversation as they were filling out a job application. She had asked them to leave. She had stepped out for a few minutes to go over to the coffee shop when one of the other subjects approached her and confronted her about that. Kane Security was later called, and there was a report filed with Kane Security.
So, ladies and gentlemen, I'm allowing this statement, which is an out-of-court statement not made under oath in this courtroom, for either corroboration purposes or impeachment purposes of a witness who has already testified under oath in this courtroom. And so you're to use it for that purpose and solely that purpose, and not the truth of what was said in that out-of-court statement. Go ahead, Mr. King.
Who else did you try and make contact with at that point?
I tried to get a hold of just about anybody in that shopping center. I went to every business that could have had a camera, could have had some sort of surveillance outside to maybe capture them walking around the North Hills area.
And Mr. Hupp that testified earlier, did you have occasion to speak with him as well?
I did.
And why did you want to speak with him?
Because he was the one that was at the Marijuana Anonymous class, and he was just somebody to be able to verify if they actually were at the class on that day.
And Your Honor, if I may publish State's Exhibit 66, which is already in evidence.
Yes.
Detective Brady, this is a photograph that previously was identified as the sort of North Hills general area. Can you show us on there where the, for example, Ben & Jerry's is that you spoke with Ms. Radley?
Yes, Daniel.
Yes, sir.
Right here.
And when we've been talking about Bonefish, is that in North Hills proper that's on that map, or can you generally show us where it is?
Ben & Jerry's would be be up in here.
Bonefish.
Or Bonefish, I'm sorry. Yes, Bonefish would be up in here. It'd be up Six Forks on the other side of Laster Mill when it meets Six Forks.
And you said that you had attempted to sort of figure out who had information to approach.
Yes.
show you State's Exhibit 74, again, sort of an aerial photograph, and ask if you recognize the area depicted in State's Exhibit 74.
Yes, ma'am.
And what is that area?
It is a further out aerial shot of what you just saw. It shows the North Hill, or the North Hills property, as well as the belt line, and then further up Six Forks Road.
And at the top here, St. Mark's United Methodist Church, were you able to determine where the Marijuana Anonymous's meeting was?
That's where Mr. Hupp said it was.
And is that also in the general area of North Hill?
The general area, yes, ma'am.
And would it help to illustrate overall the area between the church and the Alistair complex?
Yes, ma'am.
Here at this time, the state would move to introduce State's Exhibit 74 for illustrative purposes.
Any objection? It's allowed.
And would ask to publish that via the projector.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, stand again, sir.
Detective Brady, standing up if Your Honor doesn't mind.
Yes.
Can you show us where on that map the church is?
St. Mark's is right here. This is Six Forks Road. That's the belt line. So it's right here.
And where is North Hills Mall?
This is the North Hills area right here.
And can you see sort of the area where Bonefish would be on that?
I believe it would be right here.
And that sort of white square?
Yes,
And then where are the Alistair apartments themselves?
right here, Victim's Park.
And it looks a little different than State's Exhibit 5 we've been doing. Is that how it looks today?
Post-construction, yes.
Could you estimate about how far it is there from the church down to the Alistair?
It's a couple miles. It's walking distance.
At some point, did you also try and make contact with the folks at the Super 8 Motel?
I did.
And why did you want to do that?
Obviously, through investigations, we found that that is where they went afterwards.
Yeah, first witness.
Yes.
First witness. I'm going to show you what previously was State's Exhibit 68 and 69 from the motel and ask if you recognize these two documents.
Yes, ma'am.
Earlier, Mr. Jones had indicated that these are documents that are created in the ordinary course of business at the Super 8. Did you try and determine whether you could, in fact, find the state in the course of your investigation?
Yes.
And with respect to the ID
It says it's power cord for a Lenovo computer.
And do you know which computer this belongs to?
By this, no.
But the orange one, were you aware that Detective Morris had collected?
Yes.
Okay. And so State's Exhibit 75, do you know where that was collected?
It would have been the orange, it would have been attached with the orange one.
No, the orange one, I'm sorry, was attached to the computer.
Right. So
one,
this would have been the other one that was found in Wake Forest.
in Michael McCollum's residence.
Yes.
And were you present again when that search
I
was
was.
done? So you bagged the computer and was someone
Computer,
else?
the power cord, yeah, everything went, and then Detective Morris and I were the ones that packaged the information.
And so looking at State's Exhibit 75, does that appear to be the power cord that you collected at
Correct.
Mr. McCollum's? And again, did it have any additional testing done to it?
No.
Here at this time, the state would move to introduce State's Exhibit 75 as the power cord for Lenovo.
Any objection?
No.
It's allowed.
And State's Exhibit 76, previously Detective Gibney talked about collecting buccal swabs from Miss Redden and from this defendant, Travion Smith. I know you said you didn't interview Mr. Anthony. I think the earlier testimony was from Detective Falk. Would you have requested that Detective Falk also get a sample from the defendant, Ronald Anthony?
Correct. Yes, ma'am.
And again, why do you take these swabs?
It's just for that, the DNA evidence that we collected from the scene, it would be used to be able to compare. Not everybody's DNA is on file, so sometimes we have to take these swabs if we want to try to compare a DNA that we might get in a crime scene.
And as a result of the collection, did he let you know that he had in fact gotten the swab from Ronald Anthony?
Yes.
Does it appear that it has also been tested further?
Yes, ma'am.
Brady, when you went into the downstairs apartment, which we've been calling the leasing office, do you know whether or not there were any water bottles down there?
There were water bottles on the kitchen counter.
And specifically like big water bottles, individual water
I think they were
bottles?
just the individual water bottles. I believe they had the logo or something from the apartment complex on it.
When you walked into the upstairs apartment, Melissa's apartment, specifically in the children's room, did you hear anything in that room?
There was a kind of large box fan that was running in there.
And could you actually hear it? Like, did it?
It was running. It was, yeah.
To be clear, that whole area that you've described from St. Mark's Methodist Church down to the Alistair, is that all within the city of Raleigh?
It is.
Any further questions, sir?
Cross-examination.
Good afternoon, ma'am.
So there were a lot of different parts to this investigation.
Yes, ma'am.
And we've all heard about them at this point. There's still some forensic evidence that we probably have more to hear about, but I think everyone has sort of a pretty good overview of the different parts.
Yes, ma'am.
So there was the homicide scene, and then there was also the burglary scene. And you've said that they had separate investigators on them
Correct.
and separate agents from the CCPI.
Correct.
And they had separate case numbers.
Correct.
So they had separate evidence numbers.
Correct.
And there was a fairly large amount of evidence collected from both of those locations.
From the victims, there was a large amount. From the bottom, not as much, but yes.
And then there were the breaking and enterings to the various cars
Correct.
that were all kind of processed as a unit. sort of, right? Like the same people
I
took
believe, oh,
care of
yes,
that?
yes, ma'am.
So the same CCBI agent handled all of that processing?
I believe so, yes, ma'am.
And there were detectives from your unit who were specifically tasked with making sure that all of that piece of the investigation was sort of understood?
Yes, ma'am.
And there were additional search warrants and scenes at Michael McCollum's home? Yes?
Yes, ma'am.
And out in Oxford?
Yes, ma'am.
And you have also mentioned that the State Bureau of Investigations was involved in helping with the investigation.
Correct.
And the medical examiner's office was involved. So you had the team of 5 people from your homicide unit.
Correct.
They were all working on this case with you at the same time.
Correct.
And then you had various other detectives and supervisors from the Raleigh Police Department that helped with a large, like the video collections.
Correct.
For instance.
Yes, ma'am.
Any area where people had some sort of specialization, then those folks might help you with one particular piece of the case.
Yes, ma'am.
And you and others have told us about how important it is to sort of preserve evidence in a case like this and have regular meetings
Yes, ma'am.
so that everybody who's working on it can know what the other people are doing and learn about all the new information that's being gained.
The best that we can, yes, ma'am.
And you, as the lead investigator, one of your main tasks, I don't even know the right word, was just to sort of make sure that one person was attempting to try as best you could to keep up with all the different arms of the more than 8-armed octopus.
Yeah, the supervisor is the one that really runs that, but yes, as the lead agent, I'm ultimately in charge, yes.
Okay. And so you also did, as has been mentioned here at the end, you helped to coordinate with the district attorney's office, getting ready for trial.
Yes, ma'am.
And you're also the person that had to help us, for instance, if we wanted to go look at the evidence.
Yes, ma'am.
So sort of the person who had the most contact with the most number of pieces of the whole pie.
Yes, ma'am.
And you made or helped to make in your team meetings decisions about what to process.
I mean, if you're referring to like the victims and that, I mean, obviously I was there, so we did that with CCBI, but anything that was after it would be a team meeting.
So, for instance, Detective Morse told us that there were certain items that were sent to the SBI early.
Correct.
And that would have been a decision that you and the other members of the team would have made about which pieces of evidence would be most likely to help you learn the most amount of information early on.
Either me or a supervisor or somebody in our command staff.
Okay. And so you were also involved in the decision to, as you've said, like not only get the rape kit in the case, but also to ask for the extra evidence from the fingernail clipping
Yes,
and the
ma'am.
toenail clipping.
Yes, ma'am.
And that was partly because there was some evidence in the room that there had been a struggle.
Yes, ma'am.
And so that was particularly important evidence to gather.
Yes, ma'am.
So in the course of all of this, you've also been here over the course of the trial.
Yes, ma'am.
So you know more than anybody else about sort of who did what and who talked to who, and you were sort of the point person from the Raleigh Police Department in putting all that information together and working with the district attorneys for this process.
Yes, ma'am.
And I think that you told us that you called, and the CCBI took all the pictures in this case.
Yes, ma'am.
And you are the person who called and asked for 2 separate people to come out that day to process both the upstairs and the downstairs
I did.
apartments.
I think that was a collaboration between me and the CCBI supervisor.
And was it then you or did detectives Falk, and I want to say Gibney, call to have somebody else process the cars and the parking garage?
I think it was just because we knew that the 2 agents were going to be there in those scenes for a long time, so there needed to be somebody that was separate and apart to process those, or else it would probably been a week or so before they got done.
You've told us that the person who processed the upstairs scene was a woman,
It was.
but there was a supervisor that also helped with that.
Correct.
And her name is Agent Gold.
Yes. Yes,
And
ma'am.
his name is Agent Galloway.
Yes. Yes,
Okay,
ma'am.
so Agent Gold, and then her supervisor, Galloway, were primarily responsible for the upstairs. And then there was an Agent Foran,
Yes, Foran.
Foran,
Yes.
and he is the person.
She.
Who processed the downstairs apartment.
Correct, ma'am.
And then it was Agent Thompson
Yes, ma'am.
that came out to handle the cars and to do that gate area.
Yes, ma'am.
And over the course of this process, have you become aware of the inability to find any pictures that have been taken of the gate area?
Through conversation with you, yes, ma'am.
And have you had any chance in looking through everything to see that perhaps that was there and somehow missed?
I don't recall seeing a picture.
Okay. So she did do the processing of the cars, but she didn't take any pictures as far as you know of the gate.
I wasn't there, so I don't know, ma'am, no.
All right. And let me turn to asking you, some of these are things that are a little out of order because we haven't heard about some of what's actually, more specifics of what's inside the apartments. But there weren't any fingerprints that were linked to anybody besides Mr. Langley and Mr. Wimberly that were collected.
Correct.
But there were some other impressions that were collected from both the upstairs and the downstairs
Yes, ma'am.
apartments.
Yes, ma'am.
And would they be most generally described as what people believe to be cloth impressions?
There was one that was a cloth impression and another one that had like a dot impression.
The polka dots.
Yes, ma'am.
And then the other type of impressions looked more like material.
It just would have been a material, yes, ma'am.
And with latent testing, without going into it in any great detail, is part of the point that you have something to make a comparison to.
Well, I mean, that's what we'd like to, yes.
Right. So with a fingerprint, you are comparing a found print to a known print.
Correct.
Or if you're looking at footwear impressions, you would normally have a shoe that you were using to make a comparison to an impression that was collected at a scene.
Yes, ma'am.
And in this case, there weren't any gloves or any other specific fabric that was collected as part of the evidence.
There was none collected, no, ma'am. Not gloves or some sort of fabric handwear.
And I should actually perhaps rephrase that, because there were some gloves collected, but there were never any gloves collected from anywhere that anybody at the RPD or CCBI or anyone else had any reason to believe had anything to do with
That
this
is correct,
case.
yes, ma'am.
So you were at the scene and you did go through both the upstairs and the downstairs
did.
scenes.
Yeah, I went through most of the bottom afterwards.
Okay. May I approach you?
Excuse me.
I want to see.
but from the parking lot.
And so, again, just to sort of, because you are kind of a person who has always had like this global sense of all of this, there are some evidence item numbers that we may hear more about as the case goes on. But I would like to just take a minute with you to talk about where these different things were located.
Okay.
Okay? So, and so there are 5 fabric impressions
I believe so, yes.
that I would like to sort of just talk to you briefly about, so
Okay.
you can help identify where these different impressions were found, so that then if there's more evidence about them later, we can sort of refer back and have that big picture.
Okay.
Make sense?
Yep.
Okay,
Yes,
so there, you have said that there were the ones that were the sort of polka dot impressions.
Correct.
And one of the places where those were most prominently found was on the bedpost in the victim's bedroom.
Yes, ma'am.
And that's one of the, there were a lot of pictures taken of that location. Do you remember those impressions making a sort of an impact on all the different people that saw them, that they seemed significant?
Yeah, yes, ma'am.
And then there were other impressions that appeared to be that polka dot pattern that were on the inside of the sliding glass door.
I believe so, yes.
And then on the, if you're looking at that picture that you're looking at,
Yes, ma'am.
which shows the victim's apartment from the back side, the parking lot side.
Yes, ma'am.
And if you're looking at the left side of it,
Yes, ma'am.
there were also some of those polka dot impressions found on the rails on the left upstairs railing.
I believe so, yes, ma'am.
And then the other type of impressions were on the right side if you're facing the building,
Correct.
and on the exterior.
Correct.
So none of the sort of more fabric type impressions were found inside the apartment.
Correct.
Okay. And the jurors have seen the pictures of Melissa on her bed.
Yes, ma'am.
And one of the things that's striking in those pictures is the cord which comes down.
Yes, ma'am.
To very close to where she's lying.
Correct.
Based on that and on the conversations that you had with people that knew Melissa, did you have an opinion about whether or not she was likely sleeping with her phone right there with her at the bed?
From everything it said, she always had her phone with her. She plugged it in at night and would be on it at night.
Right. So it was, based on that, seemed like the phone had probably been plugged in to charge until before it was taken.
I believe so, yes.
Based on her
Based
daily
on,
practice.
yes, exactly, yes, ma'am.
And you mentioned going out to retrieve that phone out in Wake Forest.
Yes, ma'am.
And without telling us anything that anybody said, your trip out there with Detective Gill to look for that phone was based on information that had been obtained in Ronald Anthony's interview.
Judge, without telling us what it said.
But things that the police do that explain their further actions, Your Honor, is...
I'm going to allow it, but we'll...
Or we can withdraw it, Your Honor.
I'm going to sustain the... I believe it opens a door, but so I'll allow the question.
Or we'll just withdraw it, Your Honor. I mean, that's the simplest thing to do. That's the simplest thing to do. He hasn't answered.
All right, jury's to disregard.
One other thing that you collected in the process of determining what physical evidence there was at the scene in those first 2 days were the shoes of the different people who might have gone out.
Yes, ma'am.
Been in the apartment or gone out on the deck.
Yes, ma'am.
And I would like to there may come a time when the jurors look at pictures in this case, and some of the pictures will be of things that appear blue, and some will be of things that appear sort of black, and some will be of things that appear to look like blood. Is that because of different processing that was done at the scene?
Yes, ma'am.
And
Yes.
I am showing you what's been labeled as Defense Exhibit 9, just for
Yes, ma'am.
illustrative purposes. Can you tell in that picture whether some of that processing has occurred?
It appears, yes, ma'am.
And is there a footprint that is visible after the processing in that picture?
I can't really see anything in this picture, no.
If you look down in that area.
Oh, in that area, yes. I'm sorry, I was looking at the railing.
But on the floor of the deck.
Correct.
It appeared that there was a.
It's cut off at the very end, but yes.
And do you know if that's one of the footwear impressions that the CCDI did any analysis on?
I'm not 100% sure.
And do you know whether a request was ever done to actually do elimination work on the shoes?
There was a request, yes.
Okay. I believe early in your testimony you referred to the dryer vent.
Correct.
And again, if you're looking that picture that I gave you, so we have a reference point. If you're looking at the building, it's the dryer vent on the right-hand side.
Correct.
That was collected.
Yes, ma'am.
And processed.
Yes, ma'am.
And there is also a dryer vent on the left-hand side.
There could be. I'm not 100% sure if there is.
Okay. So
that wasn't anything that wasn't a piece of evidence that we took.
And so you don't remember anything about the appearance of that dryer vent or any conversations about the second dryer vent?
Again, I don't know if they were doing it. We had two different crime scenes, and I may have been in another part of an investigation.
Okay. So not to sort of have it be a huge explanation, but there are pictures that the jury has seen of just showing that there are what some people refer to as blood spatter
Yes, ma'am.
at a variety of places in the bedroom.
Yes, ma'am.
In this case. And there are also a few areas such as the purple laundry hamper, where what appears to be blood is more of a transfer as opposed to spatter.
Correct.
And so just, again, being very brief in your a description, can you sort of just tell the jury a little bit about what's the difference between spatter and transfer?
Well, I'm not an expert in any way on blood and transfer and
Yes.
that, but my
Understood.
basic layman terms is splatters usually, if there is some sort of blow and blood goes from the blow, what's considered sometimes cast could be if using a knife, if I'm stabbing and I go like that and the blood shoots off. That's layman's terms.
Whereas transfer is if somebody has blood on them.
Correct.
Sufficient so that when they walk by something, they would get blood on that other thing.
Correct.
Also equally layman's terms.
Correct.
But that's sort of the general difference.
Correct.
Just trying to figure out what makes sense in terms of where we are in the trial. You said you did a lot of being out there and helping them get everything together. It's a lot of just like helping to get everything loaded and get everything packaged and get everything organized for those
Correct.
2 days.
Correct, yes, ma'am.
And you also answered a few questions of Ms. Chiquita's about getting information about other possible witnesses in the case.
Yes, ma'am.
And you mentioned one of those two people. You were actually, well, tell me, because I don't remember exactly, but my memory is that you were contacted directly by Attorney Nunley.
Correct.
So with his client, who is Mr. Maurice Brown.
Correct.
Attorney Nunley contacted you directly because he knew you were the lead investigator on the case.
I would say so, yes.
And he thought that his client might have helpful information. And then you sort of told the other folks that were involved in the process and set up that interview.
Yes, I advised the Wake County District Attorney's Office of it, and we organized an interview.
And you also schedules to find a time that worked for everybody.
Yes, ma'am.
And so that correspondence went on over a course of several weeks.
I believe so. I don't remember the dates, but it wasn't immediate.
And you, I believe you told Ms. Chiquita that when MB came to your attention, it was also, exactly what you said, but like an attorney, I don't know what you called it, but it was an attorney that had made you aware of it.
I think Ms. Phelps notified the District Attorney's Office, and they notified me.
And do you, and there were emails back and forth between you and the District Attorney's Office?
Phone calls. I don't remember how we were in contact, but we were in contact.
And do you remember after getting that initial contact from them about the fact that this possible witness existed, responding back that it would be up to them, but it would be the second person to be interviewed? That
I'm going to object to, I don't know who this email's from.
Sustain.
You're on the second approach, Your Honor.
Yes, ma'am.
Does it refresh your recollection about how you first became aware of them?
I can't 100% say this was the first, but it is obviously a contact point, yes.
And looking at that, does it refresh your recollection about your response being that that would be the
I
second
object
question?
to Detective Brady's response to an email sent to Jason while in our office.
Which we did not elicit.
I would suggest it's work product, but it's privileged. They have it, obviously, but that doesn't mean it's admissible. Maybe we need
May
to
I
be
see
heard.
it?
Yes, sir.
So members of the jury will take a mid-afternoon recess, ask you to return at 4:45. If you'll recall all the instructions, leave your notepads in your chairs, please. Ms. D?
Well, Your Honor, I would just first note that, I mean, I did intentionally ask the question in a way that it wouldn't involve any direct connection to anybody in the district attorney's office. I do think that the state has asked a number of questions about the quality of the investigation and how well the investigation was done, and that makes the issues about some of those sort of determinations and decision-making and quality issues through the course of the investigation relevant for the defense to be able to ask questions about as well. I think that Cowles v. Whitley has some language on that point. And so based on that, we would maintain that we have the right to ask a limited question about whether or not he remembers making that response to interviewing this second snitch witness.
So I mean, I'm not sure what the probative value of it is other than a discussion relating to the potential credibility issues of a witness, which is within the work product. I mean, that's the mental impressions of counsel, and I'm trying to understand how that is probative of anything.
Well, it's not of counsel, it's of Detective Brady. What his impressions were and his determination about what witnesses were going to be interviewed moving forward. And, Your Honor, I am going to happily live with whatever ruling the court has, but I did want to be heard on it, and I do think that when there has been as much of an effort made to sort of, and we haven't sort of, there have been some sort of bolstering testimony just about the quality of the investigation and all the things that went on about that, and so I
guess
feel
I'm sorry, I'm just not sure. I don't see how that is probative of either a lack of thorough investigation or a particularly robust investigation. I'm not sure how it has
Well, it doesn't speak to either necessarily, but it speaks to sort of the nature and quality of it moving forward, that that its dependence on these witnesses and questions about whether or not that was the best decision to be making. And it's certainly not the work product of the attorneys or their impressions, because that's not the person who I was asking. And again, but that's.
You can, I'm going to sustain the objection, stick with the ruling that I had, and you're welcome to make it part of the record if you wish.
And just do the proper now.
Right. I would also just, you asked me about waiving final arguments, and I would just urge you to be cautious with respect to Exhibit 9 and Exhibit 10. I would just note that for the record, because you asked me whether I had any arbitrary lines. I do not, but I am again reading the case law on this, and I would just urge you to be cautious if you intend to preserve a final argument. I don't want to get into a protracted discussion about it now, but I just would say that, when you're handing exhibits that are to the witness and then asking the witness to describe those exhibits or read from those exhibits, those tend to perhaps fall into the category of things that courts have said constitute a waiver of a final argument.
May I ask a follow-up question?
Yes.
So Detective Reali, if you can go back now and tell us whether this refreshes your recollection about your response to questions about whether or not MB should be interviewed as part of the investigation. And did you note some concern at that time about there being, well, why don't you just tell us as part of the proffer what your response was?
My response was, it's up to you guys. This will be the second person that we interview that we will not use. In quotation, Chris Clegg. Let me know what you guys want to do. Next week will be better for me. And I sign my name, or types Sean.
Okay. I have nothing further, Your Honor.
All right. I'm still concerned about the question about the iPhone. We spent a lot of time on an excerpt from an interview that would fairly characterize that conversation. I mean, I think the testimony would be from the interview of your client, or the question was that Mr. Anthony said that you had information that Mr. Smith threw the phone in the woods, and I'm concerned about the perception that is left with the jury that, well, that came from Ronald Anthony's interview, so the impression being that Mr. Anthony threw it in the woods or knew where it was or something, and I am concerned about the that is a false impression based on what the testimony or what the interview with Mr. Anthony disclosed.
Well, in all candor, Your Honor, I think that all of the witnesses have Mr. Anthony with the phone all the time. There aren't any witnesses that ever identify Mr. Smith having the phone. So you've got in Maurice Brown's interview, he is the one who identifies Ronald Anthony as having the phone. In Sarah Redden's interviews, she identifies Ronald Anthony as having the phone. And she's already testified about that here today. The only person that ever makes any suggestion that anyone besides Ronald Anthony had the phone was Ronald Anthony. So I withdrew the question, and I understand the concerns, but it is something where all of the evidence suggests that Ronald Anthony had the phone, and so that was, putting aside the issues of the proffer, that was sort of where my head was in making that inquiry, and trying to make it clear when I made it that I didn't mean it to include any content of what anybody had said. But there's obviously a lot of other evidence that puts him in possession of that phone, puts Mr. Anthony in possession of the phone.
All right. Well,
And the purpose for my objection, Judge, is we spent a long time making sure that didn't come into evidence over our objection. And so that was my concern, which is much like yours.
right, I mean, I would say that had the witness answered, yes, that information came from Ronald Anthony's interview, I certainly would have allowed this witness or in other evidence to say Mr. Anthony in his interview said that Mr. Smith threw that phone in the woods and smashed it. I mean, that would have certainly opened the door to that response. So regardless of what other witnesses might say about who had the phone, I think that the way that question was phrased would clearly open the door to an explanation. So again, I'm not sure anything more than a caution is warranted. You did withdraw the question. He didn't answer it. I asked the jury to disregard it, but I would just caution you about questions like that state a fact that only an hour ago we'd spent a good bit of time debating the probative value versus prejudicial value of that very fact. So, all right. We'll be in recess then for about 10 minutes.